Welcome once again to Detective Duo, a home for timeless voices and enduring mysteries, from the sharp eyes of Tommy and Tuppence to the hidden corners of England's past. Subscribe if you enjoy these mysteries, and let us know where you're listening from today. It began with the sound of the Morning Post sliding through the brass letter flap at Sanssouci, their modest house in Wimbledon, and landing upon the linoleum with an authority that suggested drama. Tuppence, in a rose-patterned dressing gown, was watering the geraniums in the bay window. Tommy, behind his newspaper, was engaged in the difficult art of balancing a slice of toast, a cup of coffee, and his sense of well-being. More bills, he predicted without looking up. Unless, of course, the Foreign Office has finally remembered how indispensable we are. Tuppence bent to gather the envelopes. The topmost one was thick, cream-coloured, addressed in a shaky hand. Mrs. Thomas Beresford, private and urgent. There was no return address. "That," she said, turning it over, "is not a bill, or if it is, it's a genteel one." Tommy glanced over his paper. "Open it before the suspense kills me. The toast's already given up." Tuppence slit the flap neatly with a hairpin. A single sheet fell out, covered in careful, wavering script. She read it once, frowned, and read again aloud. "Dear Madam, I beg you will forgive my boldness in writing, but there is a man, a stranger, seen entering the nursery window at night. I thought you should be told for the sake of the child. Yours faithfully, a Dewhurst." There was a small silence, filled only by the tick of the mantel clock. "Well," said Tommy at last, "I'm relieved to find we have a nursery. I'd been meaning to discuss it with you." Tuppence ignored him. "Who is Mrs. Dewhurst, and why does she think I've got a nursery? This address isn't even on the envelope. It only says to Mrs. Thomas Beresford, nothing else." "She must have taken the trouble to track you down through psychic channels," suggested Tommy. "Perhaps she's one of your old admirers." "Don't be absurd. The only admirer who ever called me Mrs. Thomas Beresford is you, and even you don't do it often." She reread the letter, then turned it toward the light. "Look, there's a faint watermark. St. Mildred's on Wye. That's in Gloucestershire, isn't it? Cotswold's Way. Excellent cider and alarming gossip." Tuppence's eyes brightened with the unmistakable gleam of curiosity that had undone many of Tommy's peaceful weekends. "A stranger, the nursery window, a letter to the wrong person. It's positively begging to be investigated." Tommy groaned. "My dear girl, the last time something begged to be investigated, we ended up chasing a murderer through a duck pond." "All the more reason we're overdue for another." By lunchtime they had packed a small suitcase, just in case, telephoned Albert to feed the cat, and caught the afternoon train. The countryside unfolded in slow green waves. Sheep dotted the slopes like forgotten handkerchiefs, and Tuppence's excitement grew with every mile. "Do you realize," she said, tapping the letter on her knee, "that whoever wrote this believes there's a child in danger?" Tommy tilted his hat over his eyes. "Or else she's slightly mad. Rural life encourages imagination. No cinemas, too much silence." "Then I suppose you'll be very safe there," she retorted sweetly. They arrived at St. Mildred's on Wye as the afternoon softened into gold. The little station boasted one porter, 2 flower beds, and a notice board advertising the annual chrysanthemum show. A short walk brought them into the heart of the village, a scatter of cottages, a shop with fly-specked windows, and, presiding over it all, a large house at the far end of the lane with green shutters and a gate that needed oiling. "That must be Mrs. Dewhurst's," said Tuppence. "She wrote from the house with the view of the nursery, remember?" The gate protested as they entered. The garden was tidy but joyless, the sort of place where flowers bloom under supervision. Mrs. Dewhurst herself appeared at the doorway, a small, anxious woman in lavender wool, hands twisting a handkerchief as though she feared it might escape. "Mrs. Beresford?" she asked, peering at Tuppence with watery eyes. "Oh, I'm so glad you've come." Tuppence smiled reassuringly. "We received your letter this morning. I'm afraid there's been some mistake. My husband and I haven't had a nursery for years. In fact, we live in London." Mrs. Dewhurst's colour faded. "Then you didn't send anyone to look after the house opposite?" "No." She hesitated, then drew them inside to a neat parlour smelling faintly of beeswax and nervous energy. The windows faced the road, and beyond it, across a strip of meadow, stood a grey stone manor with blank eyes and peeling shutters. "That's Greystones," Mrs. Dewhurst whispered. "Empty these 5 years. But 2 nights ago I saw a man standing beneath the nursery window, that one there, on the east side, and I heard a child crying." Tommy followed her trembling finger. The manor loomed like a slumbering giant. Its upper windows reflected the lowering sun. "Could it have been the wind?" he suggested. "The wind doesn't cry, Mummy." Tuppence shivered despite the warmth. "Did you call anyone?" "The constable. He came yesterday, but he laughed. Said I'd been reading novels." "Smart man," murmured Tommy. Tuppence shot him a look. "And since then?" "Last night the light was on again, only for a minute, in the nursery. Then it went out. I thought, perhaps, if I wrote to the lady of the house, she would know what to do." "The lady of the house being me," said Tuppence slowly. "But why me?" Mrs. Dewhurst clasped her hands. "I found an envelope once, years ago, blown against my hedge, addressed to Mrs. Thomas Beresford, South Audley Mansions. It must have fallen from a car. I kept it, one of those odd things one keeps. And when this happened, well, it seemed a sign." Tommy gave a low whistle. "You do collect admirers by the strangest methods." Tuppence ignored him again, leaning forward. "You say you heard a child. Could you tell if it was real or a memory?" Mrs. Dewhurst's gaze drifted to the window. "I don't know. Sometimes I think the house remembers. That's all." Her voice trembled. The air of the little parlour grew heavy with something unsaid. Tuppence rose briskly. "Well, Mrs. Dewhurst, we can at least put your mind at ease. We'll have a look at Greystones before nightfall." Mrs. Dewhurst caught her hand. "Be careful. The place is wrong somehow. Things happen there." The path to Greystones was overgrown, the gate chained but loosely so. Tommy unhooked it with cheerful disregard for trespass laws. Inside, weeds brushed their ankles and the drive crunched beneath their steps. The manor up close smelled of dust and loneliness. "Picturesque," said Tommy. "Ideal for a honeymoon, if one dislikes comfort." Tuppence pressed at the front door. It yielded reluctantly with a moan of hinges. Inside lay stale air, dim light, and a silence that felt thick enough to touch. They moved room to room, drawing room, dining room, kitchen, all neglected, yet faintly lived in, as though memory still walked beside them. Upstairs, the nursery door hung slightly ajar. The late sunlight pooled on a faded rug, toys strewn like ghosts of laughter. On the windowsill lay a small wooden horse, its head broken clean off. Tuppence bent to pick it up. The break was fresh, the wood pale where it had split. "Someone's been here recently," she whispered. Tommy crouched beside her, examining footprints in the dust. Large shoes, male, not more than a night old. She straightened, listening. The house seemed to breathe faintly around them. Then came a sound, a low creak from the corridor. Tommy turned sharply. A man stood there, gaunt, grey-haired, with a key ring glinting at his belt. "What the devil are you doing in here?" he demanded. Tommy stepped forward, all easy charm. "Admiring the local architecture. You must be the caretaker." "Name's Lendon," the man growled. "No one's to enter this house without leave. There's nothing here worth your trouble." Tuppence smiled disarmingly. "We were only curious. The windows looked so sad." "Best let 'em stay sad." He jingled his keys, eyeing them narrowly. "Locks are for keeping out what's better left out." They thanked him and withdrew under his suspicious gaze. Outside, the dusk had settled purple over the fields. As they turned down the lane, Tuppence glanced back once. A motor car stood half hidden behind the hedgerow, engine idling. Through the windscreen she glimpsed a woman in a dark veil watching the manor. The car moved off at speed as soon as their eyes met. Tommy followed her gaze. "Friend of yours?" "No, but I have a feeling she knows ours." That night, in the snug of the village inn, Tuppence stared at the broken toy horse on the table between them. "Tommy," she said softly, "whatever happened in that house, it hasn't finished yet." He raised his glass. "Then here's to unfinished business." Outside, across the meadow, the house with the green shutters waited in silence, and somewhere within its empty nursery, a floorboard creaked as though answering. There was a long pause, the kind in which people decide whether to tell the truth or send it packing. Lendon's fingers tapped against his ring of keys. "I'll escort you out," he said at last. "I don't like strangers poking about. This place has enough talk around it already." "Talk?" said Tuppence sharply. He gave a short laugh. "Old stories, accidents, ghosts, if you like that sort of thing." "Do you like that sort of thing?" He ignored the question and led the way downstairs. The echo of his boots on the wooden steps sounded like the measured beat of a clock marking the end of visiting hours. At the front door, Tuppence hesitated. "You said there's talk of ghosts. What kind?" Lendon turned, one hand on the bolt. "The kind that shouldn't have been born," he said flatly, and closed the door behind them. Outside, the afternoon light had turned to a cool amber. Tuppence drew a long breath. "Well, that's a friendly fellow. Reminds me of a headmaster I once disliked." "Caretakers," said Tommy, brushing dust from his coat, "are a breed dedicated to preserving two things: silence and cobwebs." They walked round the side of the house, following a faint trail in the overgrown path. Tommy crouched suddenly. "Look here, boot prints. Not the caretakers, I'd wager. Too small, and the treads modern. Our man from the window, perhaps." "They lead to the side gate," said Tuppence, following. "See how the grass bends? Someone's come and gone often enough to leave a mark." The gate itself stood slightly ajar, its chain looped but unfastened. Beyond lay the narrow lane, curling toward the village. "Mrs. Dewhurst's mysterious stranger," said Tuppence quietly. "Or just a village boy up to mischief. Still, I'll admit it's odd. Our friend Lendon insists no one's entered, yet his gate tells a different story." They started back toward the road, the manor's windows glinting dully behind them like half-closed eyes. A motor car approached from the bend, dark, sleek, out of keeping with the village carts. As it slowed, Tuppence saw the driver was a chauffeur and, in the back seat, a woman in a black veil. The car hesitated beside them. Through the glass, Tuppence glimpsed pale hands folded on a handbag and the suggestion of eyes watching intently. Then, without warning, the car surged forward and vanished around the corner, leaving only the scent of petrol and perfume. Tommy exhaled. "Another admirer of yours?" "If so, she's taking the mysterious approach." Tuppence stood gazing down the lane, the manor behind her, the village ahead, the letter folded in her pocket. A broken toy horse, footprints by the gate, a caretaker who lies, and a woman who drives by to stare. "Tommy, I think we've found our next adventure." Tommy adjusted his hat. "I had a dreadful feeling you'd say that." That evening, as they walked back to the inn, the last light faded behind the roof of Greystones. From somewhere deep within the manor came the faintest sound, a single metallic clink, like a key turning in a lock. Tommy stopped. "Did you hear that?" Tuppence nodded. "Yes, and if Lendon's already gone home, then someone else has the key." They stood a moment longer, listening to the silence gather again, until Tuppence slipped her arm through his. "Come along," she said lightly. "Even ghosts deserve their privacy." But her tone was thoughtful, and as they crossed the meadow, she looked back once more at the dark house with its shuttered windows, certain that whatever had been asleep inside Greystones was no longer resting easy. The teapot rattled faintly as Mrs. Dewhurst poured, her hand trembling just enough to make the stream of amber liquid wobble across the rim. The parlour smelled of furniture polish and nervous hospitality. Lace doilies covered every flat surface as though crime might otherwise stain them. "2 lumps, Mrs. Beresford?" she asked anxiously. "Please, and it's Tuppence, really," said Tuppence, accepting her cup with a smile. "Otherwise I feel I've come to give a sermon." Tommy, occupying the armchair nearest the window, was examining a tray of seed catalogues on the side table, with the detached air of a man pretending interest in horticulture to avoid gossip. Mrs. Dewhurst's little gathering had been arranged hastily after the Beresfords' exploration of Greystones. It was, she'd declared, better to hear what people think than to let one's imagination do the talking. The guests had arrived promptly. Too promptly, thought Tuppence. Nothing like the scent of mystery to make English village ladies punctual. First came Miss Willoughby, angular and self-important, wearing a brooch the size of a door-knocker and the air of one who corrects vicars on theology. Then Mrs. Pym, the vicar's wife, soft-voiced and fluttering like a hymn-book caught in a breeze. Last had come Dr. Hart, young, neatly pressed, with dark hair that refused discipline and eyes that preferred to look anywhere but at Tuppence. The tea-table, flanked by the ticking clock and a dying fern, became the arena for the afternoon's social fencing. "So, your visitors," Miss Willoughby began, spoon poised like a weapon. "Strangers are rare in St. Mildred's, except the kind Mrs. Dewhurst writes letters about." Tuppence smiled sweetly. "Then we're in excellent company." Mrs. Dewhurst flushed. "I only meant to do my duty. Seeing a man creeping near the old nursery, "Perfectly right of you, dear," murmured Mrs. Pym, patting her hand, "though of course it's probably nothing. Greystones looks sinister even when it isn't." "It's always been sinister," declared Miss Willoughby, "ever since the affair of little Alice Wren." There was a delicate pause, like the air before a thunderclap. Dr. Hart set down his cup a fraction too hard. "I'm afraid you indulge in village melodrama, Miss Willoughby," he said lightly. "The child's disappearance was never connected with the house itself, merely unfortunate coincidence." "Unfortunate," Miss Willoughby's eyes gleamed with relish. "A child vanishes from her nursery, her governess disappears the same night, and you call it coincidence. You must forgive me, Doctor, but facts seldom fit into medical explanations." Tommy looked up. Was this recent? 10 years ago," said Mrs. Pym softly. "The owner was abroad, and the governess, foreign of course, left without notice. The police found nothing." "Except," Miss Willoughby interjected, "that the nursery window was open and the child's toy horse was missing. I remember it vividly." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. The toy horse lay at that moment wrapped in a handkerchief inside her handbag. Dr. Hart stirred his tea as though it had personally offended him. "Superstition clings to these villages like ivy," he said. "Old houses, old rumours. It's inevitable." "Do you live nearby, Doctor?" asked Tuppence. He hesitated. "At the edge of the village. My practice keeps me busy enough, though I'm often called to Mrs. Linton's place. Poor lady suffers her share of nerves." Mrs. Pym nodded sympathetically. "She's never been the same since her husband died." Miss Willoughby sniffed. "Or since she returned from abroad with that motor car and her secrets." Tuppence noted how Dr. Hart's expression flickered. Discomfort, quickly masked. "So Mrs. Linton and the manor are connected somehow?" she asked casually. Miss Willoughby opened her mouth, but the doctor's voice cut across hers. "Only geographically." It was a little too quick. Tuppence tucked the reaction away like a clue into her mental notebook. The conversation ambled into safer pastures, chrysanthemums, the scarcity of good maids, the price of coal. Yet an invisible thread of unease bound the group. Mrs. Dewhurst kept glancing at the window, Miss Willoughby glanced at the clock, and Mrs. Pym glanced at her plate as though crumbs might offer reassurance. Outside, the sunlight had begun to fade into the mellow hush of late afternoon. Somewhere in the village a bell struck 4 and the sound lingered, deep and slow. "Odd thing," said Tommy suddenly. "When we visited Greystones yesterday, I could have sworn I smelt tobacco smoke. Does anyone still use the place?" "Of course not," said Dr. Hart quickly. "Mr. Lendon locks it every evening. You must have caught the scent from the caretaker's pipe." Tuppence smiled. "Curious, then, that we saw him only after we'd found footprints and a broken toy in the nursery." Mrs. Dewhurst gave a small squeak. "Broken toy?" "Merely a relic of the past," Tommy said soothingly before Tuppence could elaborate. "We didn't wish to alarm you." Miss Willoughby leaned forward. "A relic of which past, I wonder?" Her eyes gleamed with the relish of someone who collects misfortune as others collect stamps. "Probably the mice," said Tommy cheerfully. "They're known vandals." The conversation faltered, then resumed its brittle clatter like china cups colliding. Tuppence, however, was studying Dr. Hart. He had gone very still, the sort of stillness born of inward calculation. When she caught his eye, he looked away sharply and busied himself with the sugar tongs. "Mrs. Dewhurst," she said lightly, "your view of Greystones must be splendid from this window." Mrs. Dewhurst nodded. "At night I can see the whole front. The nursery's window catches the moon." "And you've seen no light since?" "No, though sometimes—" She hesitated, then smiled apologetically. "Sometimes I think I hear something, a tune, perhaps from the radio in the next cottage, but it comes from the direction of—" She stopped. Her eyes had widened, head tilting slightly. The others fell silent, following her gaze. Through the open casement drifted a faint sound, high, wavering, almost childlike. The notes were hesitant at first, then formed a tune, unmistakably familiar. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Mrs. Dewhurst gasped and dropped her teacup. It struck the saucer, shattering, tea spilling across the cloth like sepia ink. Miss Willoughby made a strangled exclamation. Mrs. Pym clutched her rosary. Only Dr. Hart remained seated, his face drained of all colour. The lullaby continued for a few moments longer, then faded into the afternoon air. "It came from the manor," whispered Mrs. Dewhurst, "from the nursery window. I know it did." Tommy was already on his feet, moving to the window. The distance across the meadow shimmered faintly in the heat. Greystone stood silent, its grey stone walls untroubled by movement. No curtain stirred. He turned back. Nothing now. Could have been someone's wireless. "No one nearby owns one," murmured Mrs. Pym. Tuppence knelt to help Mrs. Dewhurst gather the broken porcelain, but her eyes never left Dr. Hart. He was staring out of the window, his fingers rigid around the arm of his chair. "Dr. Hart," she said softly, "you look as though you've heard that song before." He blinked, releasing his grip. "It startled me, that's all. The human mind, association, you know. Any tune can recall unpleasant things." Tuppence rose. "I dare say, though it's a curious coincidence that it should recall something unpleasant to everyone in this room." Miss Willoughby drew herself up. "Mrs. Beresford, I do hope you're not suggesting—" "I'm suggesting," said Tuppence pleasantly, "that coincidences have terrible manners. They arrive without invitation." Tommy's grin flickered. "We're rather used to uninvited guests in our line of work." The atmosphere had thickened again. The clock ticked on, loud and deliberate, marking the seconds until someone exhaled. At last Dr. Hart stood, straightening his cuffs. "I must go. I have calls to make. Mrs. Dewhurst, if you feel unwell after the shock, send for me." "Thank you, Doctor," she said faintly. He inclined his head to the others, then moved to the door. Tuppence followed him into the hall under the pretence of fetching her gloves. "Dr. Hart," she said quietly, "you seem very sure that Greystones holds nothing sinister." He turned sharply. "Because it doesn't." "Then why," she asked, "did you go pale when you heard that lullaby?" For a moment he looked as though he might answer. Then his expression shuttered. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Beresford." The door closed behind him. Tuppence re-entered the parlour, where Tommy was charming Mrs. Pym with talk of the weather, and Miss Willoughby was pronouncing that spiritualism had gone too far these days. Tuppence smiled blandly and poured herself another cup of tea from the second pot. "Well," said Tommy under his breath, "that was cheerful. Anything to report?" "Only," she said, stirring thoughtfully, "that our good doctor is either hiding something, or he's very much afraid of lullabies." She looked toward the window. Greystone stood grey and innocent in the distance, but somewhere within its empty nursery, she fancied, the last note of that cradle song still trembled in the air, waiting for night to fall. Breakfast at the Hare and Hound was an amiable battle between the cook's ambition and the sausage's resistance. Tommy had lost interest in both and was watching Tuppence with a mixture of amusement and alarm. She was surrounded by papers, postcards, and a large, leather-bound album, so heavy it bowed the little inn table beneath it. Her coffee had gone cold, her toast uneaten. The morning light fell through the mullioned window in dusty beams, glinting off the gilt lettering, St. Mildred's Parish Chronicle and Pictorial Record. Tommy folded his newspaper. "I see the local historian has converted you. Any moment now you'll start founding a heritage society." "Hush," said Tuppence without looking up. "I'm conducting serious research." He leaned across. "On sausages?" "On Alice Wren." The name seemed to cool the air around them. Tuppence turned a page carefully, smoothing its brittle edge. "Miss Willoughby lent me this last night. She guards it like the crown jewels. But look here, this section from 1935. Children's Fate, St. Mildred's Manor, the year before the girl disappeared." She pointed to a faded photograph, a sunlit window, a small child framed within, her fair hair tied with ribbon. The little figure clutched a wooden horse painted in bright stripes. Tommy whistled softly. "Our toy horse." "Exactly. The very same shape, the chipped ear, even the missing stirrup. Read the caption. Taken in the nursery window, 1935. Miss Alice Wren." Tuppence's voice softened. "She'd have been about 4, I suppose. Look at her expression. Solemn, not smiling, as though she already knew she shouldn't be there." Tommy straightened the page. And that's the same nursery window Mrs. Dewhurst sees from her house, which means our ghostly light is revisiting old ground. She sat back, brow furrowed. A missing child, a foreign governess, a house locked and empty, and now, 10 years later, the same window, the same toy. It's more than coincidence. Tommy sipped his coffee. It's also more than our breakfast, but I admit it's odd. He flipped another page idly, then stopped. Hold on, who's this? A newer clipping was pasted crookedly on the next page. Return from India. Captain and Mrs. Henry Linton take residence at Holloway Lodge. The photograph showed a handsome, uniformed man beside a pale young woman whose eyes seemed too large for her face. Linton, murmured Tommy. The name rings a bell. The motor car, said Tuppence at once. The veiled woman who watched Greystones yesterday. The innkeeper mentioned a Mrs. Linton living 2 miles out, didn't he? Tommy nodded. Yes, reclusive widow, came back after the war, keeps to herself, our veiled watcher in person. Tuppence closed the album gently. Then that's where we're going next. Tommy raised an eyebrow. And how do we explain calling on a mysterious widow who may or may not haunt derelict houses? Easily. We shall be collecting for the Society for the Restoration of Village Memorials. It sounds dull enough to open any door. He laughed. You are a menace to polite society. The road to Holloway Lodge wound through lanes bordered by hedgerows powdered with dust. It was the sort of morning that made even mysteries seem civilized. Bees droned lazily, and the smell of hay drifted on the air. Yet Tuppence, seated beside Tommy in the small hired motor, felt the unease coiling tighter with every turn. Funny, isn't it, she said, how often tragedy lives behind the prettiest hedges. Tommy adjusted the throttle. And how often we're the ones who find it. They turned in at tall gates of wrought iron. Holloway Lodge was gracious in a melancholy way. White walls streaked with ivy, windows shuttered though sunlight gleamed on the brass knocker. A gardener straightened from the borders, touching his cap with the expression of a man guarding more than roses. A uniformed maid answered their ring, and, after a pause long enough for assessment, admitted them to a hall cool with polished oak. Mrs. Linton will see you presently, she said. They waited before a large mirror that reflected their slightly dishevelled selves and a collection of African masks arranged decoratively on the wall. Tuppence murmured, a touch of the colonial about it. I wonder if they've ever smiled. Before Tommy could reply, the drawing-room door opened. Mrs. Linton entered with the composed grace of someone who had practiced serenity until it became armour. She was tall, elegantly dressed in morning grey, a veil lifted back from dark eyes that missed nothing. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford? Her voice was low, cultured, faintly foreign in its precision. You wish to see me about charitable work? Tuppence inclined her head. Yes, though we didn't wish to intrude. We're helping with the Village Memorial Fund, and we were told you'd been most generous in past years. Mrs. Linton smiled faintly. Generous, perhaps, but forgetful. I contribute to so many lost causes. Tommy, with his most winning air, said, This one at least isn't lost yet. She motioned them to sit. The room was tastefully arranged. Persian rugs, pale furniture, and an unmistakable scent of sandalwood. On the mantel stood a collection of small ornaments, each perfectly placed. It was Tuppence who noticed it first. A small wooden horse, brightly painted, its ear chipped, its head tilted slightly askew. Her breath caught, though she kept her tone light. What a charming toy. Is it an antique? Mrs. Linton's eyes flicked toward it. A keepsake, from years ago. You have an eye for detail, Mrs. Beresford. I'm afraid I collect curiosities, especially those with stories attached. The woman's lips curved without warmth. Some stories are better left untold. Tuppence smiled. I find that the untold ones are often the most interesting. For a moment their gazes met, the calm of one woman against the quiet challenge of the other. Then Mrs. Linton rose gracefully. You'll forgive me. I must attend to letters before luncheon. Dawson will see you out. The maid appeared as if summoned by thought alone. Tommy thanked their hostess politely. Tuppence, lingering by the door, allowed her eyes to sweep the room once more. On a side table lay a half-open writing case, a child's drawing peeping from beneath its cover, a stick figure with long hair and the words "Mummy and Me." She said softly, "That's a sweet picture." Mrs. Linton's gloved hand closed the case. Yes, from long ago. The tone made further comment impossible. Outside, the sun seemed brighter after the subdued interior. Tommy exhaled. Well, we've met the lady of mystery. Verdict? Tuppence shaded her eyes, looking back toward the house. Too polished, too composed, every word weighed. And that toy horse, why does she keep it? Sentimental reasons, or morbid ones. Hard to tell with widows. They reached the motor, but before Tommy could start the engine, a voice hailed them. It was the maid, breathless from running. She held out a small envelope. Mrs. Linton asked me to give you this, sir. Tommy thanked her, and she hurried back up the drive. He opened it. Inside was a crisp banknote and a short message in slanting script. For the Memorial Fund, in memory of those who never come home. Tuppence stared at the words. Those who never come home, she repeated. Odd phrase, isn't it? Not for a widow. Perhaps, but I don't think she was thinking of soldiers. That afternoon they returned to the inn and commandeered the corner table beneath the stuffed pheasant. Tuppence had the photograph album open again, comparing pages while Tommy applied himself to cider. Look here, she said suddenly. In the photograph of Captain Linton, the man beside him is Dr. Hart. Same face, 10 years younger. Tommy leaned over. So our doctor's connection to Mrs. Linton is more than medical. He was a friend of her husband's. Or something closer. And he flinched yesterday when the lullaby played, the very song a nurse would sing to a child. Suppose Mrs. Linton once had a child herself. Possible, said Tommy, though the village seems remarkably discreet about it. Too discreet, said Tuppence. She tapped the page where little Alice Wren stared solemnly from the nursery window. What if Mrs. Linton's secret and the child's disappearance are the same story told from two sides? Tommy frowned. You mean she was Alice's mother? Or her governess, or her kidnapper? Take your pick. He leaned back. All circumstantial. A photograph, a toy horse, and a whiff of melodrama. Melodrama is just truth-wearing makeup, said Tuppence dryly. Besides, Mrs. Linton's horse isn't coincidence, it's duplication. 2 identical toys in 2 households tied by the same faces. Tommy studied her. You're sure you're not seeing patterns because you want them? She closed the album decisively. In our line of work, Tommy, the day we stop seeing patterns is the day we retire. He grinned. Let's hope that day never comes. So what's next? Tuppence's gaze drifted to the window where dusk was beginning to gather over the meadow. Next we find out exactly what connects Mrs. Linton to Dr. Hart, and I rather think she won't tell us over tea. Tommy raised his glass. To tea, tension, and trouble ahead. She clinked it lightly. And to the little girl in the photograph, who may yet have more to say than anyone living. That night, long after the inn had gone quiet, Tuppence lay awake, the album open on the bedside table. The faces stared up at her from another time, the smiling fate, the child at the window, the woman in the motor car. Outside, the wind stirred faintly through the lane, carrying the distant echo of a melody, soft, uncertain, almost like a lullaby. She sat up, listening, her heart thudding. But when Tommy stirred beside her, the sound had gone. Still she whispered into the darkness, "Someone's awake at Greystones." Mrs. Linton's drawing room looked as though it had been arranged for polite confessions. Sunlight caught on polished glass, a decanter winked approvingly, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and restraint. Yet beneath the quiet refinement, there lingered something else, an unease, thin as the ticking of the Ormolu clock. "You must forgive the disarray," Mrs. Linton said, though there wasn't a cushion out of place. "My maid is new, and new maids are always too conscientious. They dust away the memories along with the dust." "Perhaps that's wise," Tuppence said, settling gracefully on a sofa that had clearly been chosen for aesthetics, not comfort. "Memories can be stubborn houseguests." Mrs. Linton's dark eyes softened briefly. "Yes, and some never leave." Tommy, who had stationed himself near the mantelpiece under pretence of admiring the portrait of a stern-looking man in uniform, offered his most engaging smile. "Your husband, I presume?" Mrs. Linton followed his gaze. "Captain Henry Linton, India Command. He died during the mutiny at Jhansi. A brave man. Too brave, perhaps." There was a moment's silence. Even the clock seemed to lower its voice. Tuppence said gently, "It must have been difficult returning here." Mrs. Linton's hand fluttered over the folds of her grey gown. "Holloway Lodge was my late husband's family home. I came because it was familiar, and because grief prefers quiet places." Tuppence nodded sympathetically. "You must find St. Mildred's peaceful after India." "Yes, peaceful, and sometimes too still. The country keeps its secrets. One learns to listen for what isn't said." It was said with such delicate emphasis that Tuppence almost missed the irony. Almost. Tommy, aware that his wife's curiosity was tightening like a spring, hastily changed the subject. "We passed Greystones Manor on our way here," he remarked. "A magnificent property, though rather neglected. I wonder who owns it now." Mrs. Linton's teacup paused mid-air. "Greystones?" "Yes," said Tuppence lightly. "It stands opposite Mrs. Dewhurst's. A charming ruin, quite romantic." The widow replaced her cup carefully. "I know nothing of it. I dislike derelict places." Tommy smiled. "You surprise me, Mrs. Linton. You seem the sort to appreciate a hint of mystery." Her eyes flickered. "Mystery belongs in books, not in life. In life it's merely trouble with better vocabulary." Tuppence laughed, but inwardly noted the tension that had entered her hostess's voice. The denial had been too swift, too smooth. Mrs. Linton rose. "Would you care to see the garden? Dawson keeps it well, though he does bully the roses." They followed her through French doors onto a terrace where an expanse of lawn stretched toward a distant orchard. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and something subtler, sandalwood again. "I'm afraid I'm not much of a gardener," Tuppence confessed. "Plants never thrive under my supervision. Perhaps they sense my impatience." Mrs. Linton smiled faintly. "Patience is overrated. Weeds, after all, are merely flowers that bloom too soon." Tommy murmured to himself, "There's philosophy for you." A discreet cough interrupted them. The maid, a young woman with the stiff posture of one who mistrusts her own apron, appeared at the terrace doors. "Beg pardon, madam, the milkman's come with the account." Mrs. Linton inclined her head. "You may see to it, Elsie." Tuppence's eyes followed the girl as she withdrew. "Your maid seems efficient." "She tries." The faintest pause. "She worked previously in the village, at one of the larger houses. Greystones, I believe." The remark was delivered carelessly, almost too carelessly. Tuppence's heart gave a small leap, but her voice remained perfectly mild. "How interesting. She must find it odd to see the house so deserted now." "Possibly. I never ask her about it." "Wise," said Tommy cheerfully. "Servants' reminiscences can be more alarming than their wages." Mrs. Linton's mouth curved in appreciation, but her fingers, Tuppence noticed, toyed with the edge of her handkerchief as if to occupy nervous hands. They lingered a few more minutes among the roses before Mrs. Linton excused herself to write letters. As she disappeared inside, Tommy muttered, "All very gracious, but I'd wager she's hiding something under that serenity." "I know it," said Tuppence, "and I'm going to find out what." Inside the house again, the Beresfords were left briefly unattended. Tuppence's gaze drifted instinctively to a small writing desk against the far wall, a handsome mahogany piece with brass handles and a small keyhole glinting invitingly. Tommy sighed. "Don't even think about it." "I never think," said Tuppence sweetly. "It slows me down." He turned toward the mantel as if inspecting the portrait again, while she crossed swiftly to the desk. On top lay a sheaf of correspondence, and, half tucked beneath them, a sheet of paper. Not ordinary paper, but thick, with the soft crayon marks of a child's drawing. She pulled it free. The lines were simple, a woman in a long dress holding the hand of a small figure. Above them, in uneven letters, was scrawled one word, "Mummy." Tuppence's breath caught. The colours were faded but familiar. That same childish hand she'd glimpsed in the drawing under Mrs. Linton's writing case during their first visit. The sound of approaching footsteps made her slip the paper back just in time. Mrs. Linton entered, calm once more, followed by the maid carrying a tray of lemonade. "I'm afraid I must cut our conversation short," said the widow. "A tiresome visitor is expected, the doctor of all people, always convinced I'm on the verge of collapse." Tommy accepted the glass with a smile. "Occupational hazard, I suppose. He can't bear anyone being healthy without him." Mrs. Linton's lips curved, though her eyes did not. "Perhaps. though he forgets that the truly ill often appear the most composed. Tuppence studied her over the rim of her glass. "You mean that, don't you?" A shadow passed over the woman's face. "I have learned that composure is cheaper than courage, Mrs. Beresford, and infinitely more convincing." There was nothing left to say. After polite farewells, they stepped once more into the sunlight. Halfway down the drive, Tommy stopped abruptly. "Well, I'll be—" A figure had just emerged from the side gate, hat pulled low, coat collar up despite the mild afternoon. It was Dr. Hart. He started at the sight of them, recovering almost at once. "Mr. Beresford, Mrs. Beresford, how unexpected." Tuppence smiled. "You and Mrs. Linton must be close neighbours." "Of sorts." He shifted the bag in his hand. "She called me about a headache." "Really?" said Tommy amiably. "I should think she keeps a good many of those." Dr. Hart's laugh was unconvincing. "Yes, nerves, nothing more." Tommy's eyes dropped to the bag. It hung light and limp. "I hope you've got the proper tonic in there." The doctor's knuckles whitened. "Of course." "Funny," said Tommy pleasantly. "You're carrying it like it's empty." There was a pause, the kind where politeness and suspicion wrestle for dominance. Dr. Hart smiled tightly. "It's lighter than usual. Good day, Mr. Beresford." He strode off toward the village, coat flapping. Tuppence watched him until he vanished around the bend. "You saw it?" "Empty as a politician's promise. He didn't visit for medicine." "No," she said thoughtfully. "He came for something, or someone, and judging by Mrs. Linton's expression when she mentioned him, it wasn't the first time." Tommy gave a low whistle. "An affair, perhaps?" "Perhaps. Or a conspiracy. Either way, there's more between them than prescriptions." Evening descended quietly over St. Mildred's, washing the cottages in blue and gold. The Beresfords returned to the inn, their minds as busy as the sparrows in the eaves. Over dinner, Tommy tried humour. "At least our suspect list is manageable. One nervous widow, one evasive doctor, and one caretaker who'd frighten a ghost." "And don't forget the anonymous note writer," said Tuppence, "though I'm beginning to suspect all four are the same person." The innkeeper brought in stew and smiled nervously. "Anything else you need, sir?" "Just information," said Tommy. "This Mrs. Linton, she keeps herself to herself, doesn't she?" "Aye," said the man, lowering his voice. "Lives quiet, but folks say her husband's death weren't the only thing she lost abroad." "What else?" asked Tuppence. The innkeeper hesitated, then shrugged. "A child, some say. A daughter. Never come back with her, but you know how stories grow." When he left, Tuppence stared into her glass. "A daughter," she repeated softly, "and a child who vanished from Greystones. What if the stories aren't separate at all?" Tommy frowned. "You mean Alice Wren and Mrs. Linton's child might be one and the same?" "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." She rose to fetch her notebook from the bedside table. The window above their little writing desk was open to the evening air. A moth fluttered against the lamp, the only sound in the still room. Then came the sharp crack of breaking glass. Tuppence gasped. A stone rolled across the floor, landing near her feet. She stooped and picked it up. Tied around it was a scrap of paper, folded roughly, the edges smudged with dirt. Tommy was beside her in an instant. "What the devil?" She unwrapped the note. The handwriting was hurried, jagged, almost frantic. "Leave the nursery alone." They stared at each other. Outside, the lane lay silent, empty but for the slow creak of the inn sign in the wind. Tommy went to the window, scanning the darkness. No one there. Tuppence laid the note flat on the desk. "Someone knows we've been asking questions." "And they don't want us asking any more." He closed the shutters firmly. "That settles it." "Yes," said Tuppence, her voice calm though her pulse was racing. "We're staying." She slipped the note into her handbag beside the photograph of the child at the nursery window. "If someone's gone to this much trouble to scare us off, then the truth must be very close indeed." Tommy nodded. "And when truth hides behind locked nursery doors," Tuppence finished softly, "that's exactly where we'll knock next." The morning after the stone incident found Tuppence at the small round table in their inn-room, surrounded by papers, the parish album, and a magnifying glass that made her look, Tommy declared, like a particularly fashionable entomologist. "I don't study insects," she retorted, peering through the glass. "Though if I did, The inhabitants of this village would make a fascinating exhibit. Tommy stretched, yawned, and adjusted his tie in the mirror. "You're sure this obsession of yours won't end with us being shot at again?" "That would imply we've been shot at once before," she said absently, "which, considering your marksmanship, might even be progress." He chuckled and leaned over her shoulder. "Still at the photographs? You were at them till nearly 2. "I found something," she said quietly. "Look." He bent closer. The faded photograph of Alice Wren, the one labelled "Taken in the Nursery window 1935, had been enlarged slightly, the details clearer. Behind the child's pale curls and solemn eyes in the reflection of the window glass was a shape, a man's silhouette, faint but distinct, broad shoulders, uniform tunic, a peaked cap. "Well, well," said Tommy, "our photographer captured more than childhood innocence." "I thought at first it was a trick of the light, but the outline's too precise," said Tuppence. "There's someone standing outside the window, watching." Tommy frowned. Uniformed, possibly military. Could it be Captain Linton? Or a police inspector or the postman? But given our luck, I'd say it's someone important to the story. She reached for her notebook. The caption says, "Miss Alice Wren, taken by O. Fenwick, photographer, St. Mildred's. We're going to pay him a call." Tommy sighed. "I suppose breakfast is now postponed by duty." "Entirely," said Tuppence. "We can eat on the way. Mysteries digest better than bacon." The photographer's shop stood between a tobacconist and the post office, its window filled with faded portraits, stiff family groups, unsmiling brides, soldiers gazing heroically into distance. A small bell jangled as they entered, releasing a faint scent of chemicals and stale lavender polish. A thin man with pince-nez and ink-stained fingers emerged from behind a curtain. "Good morning. You'll forgive the mess. Developing day." "Mr. Fenwick?" Tuppence smiled. "We're interested in one of your older photographs, taken in 1935, of a child named Alice Wren." Fenwick's brows rose. "Goodness, that was years ago. Poor little girl. Vanished, didn't she?" "You remember her?" Tommy asked. "Oh yes, charming child. Her governess brought her in, insisted on the window shot, said the light was better. Foreign lady, accent of some sort, German or Austrian perhaps." Tuppence's heart quickened. "An Austrian governess." He nodded. "Greta something. Lindbergh, I think. Very particular. Told me to make sure the reflection caught the garden. Her gentleman friend stood just beyond the hedge. I remember because she kept looking at him instead of the camera." Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a quick glance. "And the gentleman?" asked Tuppence. Fenwick frowned in concentration. "Tall, uniformed, very polished boots. I assumed he was a soldier home on leave. He spoke to her in a foreign tongue, German perhaps. When I delivered the prints to Greystones, she was gone. The housekeeper said she'd left suddenly." "And Mr. Wren?" "Abroad, I believe. I sent the bill to the solicitor and never heard more. Dreadful business. The constable questioned me at the time." Tuppence leaned forward. "Do you still have the negatives?" Fenwick's expression became apologetic. "Destroyed in the war, I'm afraid. Paper shortages. Old stock sacrificed for new." Tommy nodded thoughtfully. "You said she spoke to her gentleman friend. Did she seem afraid?" "Quite the opposite," said Fenwick. "She seemed hopeful, as though they planned something together." Tuppence thanked him warmly, and as they left, Fenwick added, "Odd you should come asking now. Only a few days ago someone else inquired about that photograph." Tommy paused. "Someone else?" "A man. Middle-aged, dark hair. Doctor's manner about him." Tuppence said quietly, "Dr. Hart." Fenwick spread his hands. "Perhaps." He didn't give a name. Outside, the air had turned misty, the light thinning into the pale grey particular to English mornings that promised nothing. They walked slowly along the lane toward the square. Tommy shoved his hands in his pockets. So, the missing governess, Greta Lindbergh, an Austrian connection, a uniformed man, and Dr. Hart nosing around old photographs, beginning to sound less like domestic scandal and more like international intrigue. "Not necessarily," said Tuppence. "He could have been an admirer, not a spy." "Uniforms rarely visit nurseries for romance, darling," she smiled faintly. "Then perhaps tragedy, the kind that hides behind locked doors." They passed the churchyard, where gravestones leaned like weary listeners, and turned toward the record office adjoining the vicarage. Inside, a sleepy clerk fetched the old parish employment registers. "Here we are," said Tuppence, tracing a line with her finger. 1934, 1935. Greystones Manor, nursemaid, Greta Lindbergh, Vienna. Dismissed 4th of July 1935. Remarks, left without notice. Tommy read over her shoulder. That's the very night the child vanished. She looked up at him. It fits too perfectly. The clerk, curious, volunteered. There was talk she'd run off with a man. Some said she went abroad. Others thought she was buried under the rose bushes. I dare say the truth lies somewhere between. Or both, murmured Tuppence. They emerged into thickening fog, the kind that muffled footsteps and made distances uncertain. The lane stretched away in grey silence. Tuppence drew her coat tighter. Funny, she said softly. Every clue leads back to the same faces. Mrs. Linton, Dr. Hart, Greystones, and now a governess who may have been Austrian, perhaps the same nationality as Mrs. Linton's husband. What if... She broke off. The soft scuff of a footstep echoed behind them. Tommy turned. The fog gave back only its own pale emptiness. Hear that? Yes. They walked on. The sound followed, slow, deliberate, never quite close enough to see. Tuppence whispered, "Someone's behind us." "Keep walking," Tommy murmured. "If they mean harm, best we're not cornered in a lane." But the footsteps quickened. They turned sharply into the square, the gas lamps just beginning to bloom yellow halos in the mist. The echo followed, nearer now, and then, without warning, a sharp crack split the quiet. Something whined past Tommy's ear and struck the lamppost with a metallic ping. Tuppence cried out, "Tommy!" He pulled her down behind the base of the lamp. "Get down!" Another shot, then silence. Footsteps running, fading into the fog. For a long moment neither moved. Then Tommy rose cautiously, scanning the emptiness. Gone. Whoever it was, they've melted like ghosts. Tuppence's hand was trembling as he helped her up. "They tried to kill us," she said, astonished. "In broad daylight." "Technically, in broad foglight," he corrected grimly. "But yes, apparently we're getting warm." She drew a shaky breath, then noticed something glinting near the curb. "What's that?" He bent and picked it up. A glove, black leather, finely made. Inside the wrist, faintly embossed in gilt, the initials H.L. Tuppence stared. H.L. Henry Linton. Or Harold or Herbert, take your pick, but the coincidence is piling up. She turned the glove over in her hands, the leather still faintly warm. Someone dropped it running away, and whoever they were, they aimed well. Tommy frowned. Which rules out Miss Willoughby. Her eyesight couldn't hit the vicarage from here. Despite herself, Tuppence laughed, the tension cracking for a moment. Then her expression sobered. "We're being watched, Tommy. Followed, threatened, and all because of a photograph taken 10 years ago. Which means the truth in that photograph still matters to someone." He guided her back toward the inn, keeping to the lamplit side of the street. The fog swirled around them like a living thing, soft and deceptive. Somewhere far off, a church bell tolled 6. As they neared the inn's door, Tuppence glanced once more behind her. Nothing but mist and the faint gleam of wet cobblestones. Yet as she stepped inside, a shadow detached itself from the alley across the square, tall, coat-collared, watching. The figure waited until the door closed, then turned away toward the road that led to Holloway Lodge. Later, by the fire in their small sitting room, Tommy examined the glove under the lamplight. Left-handed shooter, I'd wager. The glove's for the right hand, but the wear's on the opposite seam. Which means our marksman, or markswoman, was no amateur, said Tuppence. She sat curled in the chair, a blanket around her shoulders, eyes bright despite the shaken look she wore. It's all connected. Greta Lindbergh, Mrs. Linton, Dr. Hart, even the man in uniform. Tommy leaned back. "Let's hear your theory, then." "I think Greta Lindbergh wasn't just a governess. I think she was Captain Linton's mistress, or perhaps even his wife before he married Mrs. Linton. The photograph captured more than a child. It caught the secret that destroyed them all." "Possible," said Tommy, "but it doesn't explain the shooting." "No," she agreed softly. "Unless someone fears we're about to uncover proof, perhaps in another photograph or letter." Tommy rose to pour them both a brandy. "Well, whoever they are, They've done us the courtesy of confirming we're on the right trail. Bullets are excellent endorsements. Tuppence accepted her glass, managing a smile. And what's our next move? He considered. We pay another visit to Mrs. Linton. Ask about Greta Lindbergh directly this time. She won't like that. She doesn't have to, but she might slip. Tuppence turned the glove over again, tracing the letters with her thumb. HL, she murmured. Henry Linton, Greta Lindbergh, or perhaps someone else entirely. But I'd wager this glove came from Holloway Lodge. Tommy nodded. Then tomorrow we'll see if Mrs. Linton has lost one. She smiled faintly. And if she hasn't? Then she's guilty of tidiness at least. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the fog pressed against the window panes, making the small inn feel like an island afloat in grey. Tuppence set the glove beside her notebook, where the photograph of Alice Wren lay folded between pages. The reflection of the man in uniform seemed to glimmer faintly under the lamplight. "Whoever you were," she whispered, "you've just fired the first shot." The house loomed ahead like a ship run aground in the dark. Its windows were black hollows, the ivy at its flanks clinging like drowned hands. Greystones was silent again, but to Tommy and Tuppence it no longer felt empty, only patient. "Honestly," whispered Tommy as they pushed open the side gate, "if we keep creeping into abandoned houses, we'll have to start paying rent." "Hush," said Tuppence, adjusting the electric torch she'd borrowed from the innkeeper. "We're here to observe, not quip." "Observation would be much improved by tea and cake," he muttered, following her up the weed-choked path. The front door yielded with a reluctant groan. Inside, the air was thick with the cold breath of a place that remembered too much. Their footsteps stirred faint echoes down the corridor. Tuppence stopped beneath the staircase, whispering, "It's nearly 11. If anyone visits this place again tonight, we'll know." Tommy lowered the small lantern he carried, its light soft and yellow. "Remind me why we're certain they'll come back." "Because secrets have habits," she said. "They always return to the scene that hides them." They climbed the stairs, the boards creaking beneath their weight. In the nursery, moonlight fell through the cracked panes, laying silver stripes across faded wallpaper patterned with rabbits. The broken toy horse still lay in the corner, its shadow long and lonely. Tommy glanced around. "Well, here we are, the ideal setting for a haunting. What's your plan?" "We wait," he sighed. "I was afraid of that." They arranged 2 small chairs behind the wardrobe, where a view of both the window and door was possible. The house settled around them with slow groans. From somewhere deep in the walls came the scuttle of mice. Minutes slid by. Tuppence's heartbeat matched the distant ticking of her wristwatch. Tommy, less patient, whispered, "If nothing happens by midnight, we're going home. Even spooks need sleeping hours." But just as he spoke, a sound broke the stillness, faint, deliberate, unmistakably human. A footstep, then another, coming up the stairs. Tuppence's hand gripped his arm. "Listen." The steps paused outside the nursery door. A faint rustle followed, cloth brushing wood, and then the door creaked open. A narrow beam of light swept across the floor, a lantern carried by a man whose features were momentarily caught in its glow. Tuppence's breath caught. "It's him," she whispered. Dr. Hart moved cautiously into the room, every line of his posture tense. He crossed to the wall beneath the nursery window, kneeling to examine something near the skirting board. Tommy rose silently, slipped from behind the wardrobe and stepped forward. "Looking for your lost patients, Doctor?" Hart spun round. The lantern swung wildly, light flashing across his startled face. "Good God!" Before he could flee, Tommy seized his arm, pinning him against the wall. The lantern clattered to the floor and rolled, its glow now a trembling pool of light between them. "Easy there," said Tommy evenly. "No need for dramatics. We're all friends, provided you tell us why you're breaking into an empty house at midnight." Hart's breath came quick. "You wouldn't understand. Try us." The doctor's shoulders sagged. "I'm looking for something that belongs to someone who must never be exposed." "Someone or something?" asked Tuppence, stepping into the light. Hart's eyes darted to her. "You shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." "For whom?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then said in a low voice, "For everyone, if the truth comes out." "Then it must be a rather good truth," said Tommy. "Mind sharing the prescription?" Before Hart could reply, A faint click echoed from the corridor. Another figure stood framed in the doorway, slim, erect, and unmistakable even by lantern light. Mrs. Linton. Her face was pale beneath her veil, her gloved hands trembling slightly. "Stop this, all of you," she said. "You have no idea what you're meddling with." "Mrs. Linton," said Tuppence, keeping her voice calm, "you've chosen a curious hour for social calls." The widow ignored her. She crossed the room swiftly to the far wall and pressed her hand against a panel near the window. "You were searching for these, Doctor? Then you should have let them rest." The panel gave way with a soft click. From within, she drew a small bundle of papers tied with faded ribbon and a tiny locket, tarnished but still glinting gold in the lantern light. Hart's face was white. "You found them." "Yes." Her voice trembled. "I came to destroy them, to end this nightmare before it spreads again." Tommy exchanged a quick glance with Tuppence. "Destroy evidence? That sounds promising." "Please," said Mrs. Linton, "you don't understand. These letters, this locket, they're the last fragments of a story that ruined 3 lives." Tuppence stepped closer. "Whose lives?" The widow hesitated. Then she untied the ribbon, her fingers unsteady. "Mine, my husband's, and a child's who was never meant to suffer for our sins." She opened the locket. Inside were 2 miniature photographs. One showed a small girl with fair curls, Alice Wren. The other a man in uniform. "Captain Henry Linton," she whispered. "Her father." The silence that followed seemed to hum. Tuppence spoke softly. "Then Greta Lindbergh, the governess." Mrs. Linton closed her eyes. "Was my husband's mistress. He met her abroad before our marriage. When I discovered the truth, he swore it was over. But she followed him here, bringing the child. She said she would expose him if he didn't acknowledge them both. He begged my help, I thought only to spare him scandal. Greta vanished that same week." "Vanished, or was made to vanish?" asked Tommy. Mrs. Linton's face twisted with pain. "I never knew. He told me she'd gone back to Austria, that the child had been placed safely elsewhere. I believed him, because I wanted to. But after his death, I found these letters hidden in his desk. They prove everything, and worse. Greta wrote that she feared for her life, that someone in the house had threatened her." Hart stepped forward. "Enough, Clara. You're exhausting yourself." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. "You knew all this, Doctor?" He hesitated. "Captain Linton was my friend. He confided in me after the affair began. I tried to dissuade him from marrying again, but he insisted the past was buried. I helped ensure it stayed that way." "Helped how?" Tommy asked. "By silence," said Hart bitterly. "When Greta disappeared, I told the police she'd left the country. It wasn't true. But there was a child and a reputation to protect." Tuppence's voice was steady. "Whose child?" "Both theirs," said Mrs. Linton quietly. "Alice was not the Wren's child at all. She was mine by law, but not by birth." For a long moment, only the lantern's faint hiss broke the stillness. Tommy said softly, "That explains the likeness, and the toy horses." Mrs. Linton gave a faint, sad smile. "Yes, Greta made them, one for her daughter, one for me, a gesture of friendship before love turned to hate. When she vanished, I couldn't bear to destroy mine." Tuppence studied her. "And tonight, why come here now?" "Because I learned Dr. Hart had been asking questions," Mrs. Linton said. "I feared he meant to sell what he found to those who'd exploit it. So I came first, to burn the letters." Hart shook his head vehemently. "That's a lie. I came to protect her. If the truth became public, the scandal would ruin her. And what good would that do the dead?" "Perhaps justice," said Tuppence. The widow turned to her. "There's no justice left, only ghosts." She looked at the locket again, the child's face smiling up through time. "I wanted to believe the past could die quietly, but perhaps I was wrong." For a moment, Tuppence pitied her. The mask of elegance had cracked, revealing the raw edge of guilt beneath. Then a noise downstairs broke the spell, a door closing sharply. All 3 froze. "Someone else is here," whispered Tommy. Hart snatched up the lantern. "We must leave. If the caretaker finds us—" But Tuppence caught sight of movement through the nursery window, a figure crossing the meadow toward the village. Tall, swift. "Not the caretaker," she said grimly. Whoever shot at us yesterday, I'd wager." "Then go," urged Mrs. Linton. "Take the letters. Burn them if you must. I want none of this left." Tuppence hesitated, but Tommy took her arm. "She's right. We'll sort this elsewhere." Hart extinguished the lantern, plunging them into silver darkness. They crept downstairs, the floorboards moaning faintly underfoot. At the door, Tuppence looked back once. Mrs. Linton stood alone in the nursery, the moonlight on her face like the pale reflection of her own grief. She held the locket close, lips moving soundlessly, as though murmuring to the child it contained. Then she turned, struck a match, and dropped it onto the bundle of letters. Flame flared, bright and hungry. "Tommy!" Tuppence gasped. But before they could reach her, Mrs. Linton stepped back, her expression one of weary release. "It ends here," she whispered. The fire raced across the old wallpaper, licking upward with frightening speed. Tommy seized Tuppence's hand. "Out! Now!" They stumbled into the corridor as smoke billowed behind them. Hart dragged Mrs. Linton from the room, coughing. Together they fled down the staircase, the air thick with ash and the acrid scent of burning dust. Outside, the night was clean and sharp, the stars cold above the dark meadow. Behind them, a faint orange glow pulsed in the nursery window before sputtering out. They stood panting, the bundle of half-burnt letters in Tuppence's grasp, the locket glinting faintly at her throat. Tommy broke the silence. "Well, darling, we wanted answers. We've now got at least 3 varieties, all contradictory." Tuppence wiped soot from her cheek. "And one truth. Whatever happened to Greta Lindberg, someone still cares enough to kill for it." Mrs. Linton stared at the house, her voice distant. "Perhaps because some sins never really burn away." Hart turned toward her, guilt written in every line of his face. "Clara," she shook her head. "Leave me, Doctor, you've done enough." Tommy looked from one to the other, his tone quiet but firm. "This isn't over. When ashes hide bones, someone always sifts them." Tuppence slipped her arm through his. "Then we'll bring a spade." As they led Mrs. Linton down the lane, the smoke from the nursery drifted upward, dissolving into the night, not vanishing, merely changing form. By the following morning, after the local constable had been and gone and the worst of the smoke had cleared, Greystone sat with its windows open to the cool air. And somewhere, beneath the scent of burning wood, there lingered another, faint, almost imagined, the fragrance of a child's hair and the echo of a lullaby long silenced. Dawn crept over St. Mildred's in a wash of pale gold, brushing the thatched roofs with a quiet, indifferent light. The village was still, except for the distant crow of a rooster and the gentle rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. But within Greystone's manor, the shadows of the previous night lingered, heavy and accusing. Tuppence and Tommy had returned with Mrs. Linton after the inferno in the nursery, her hands trembling as she clutched the tiny locket and the half-burnt letters. The air smelled of charred wallpaper, dust, and something else, sorrow. "I don't understand," Mrs. Linton whispered, her voice thin. "How did it come to this? How could secrets buried for years be uncovered in a single night?" Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. "Sometimes secrets have an inconvenient sense of timing," he said gently. Tuppence moved beside her. "Mrs. Linton, last night you told us Greta Lindberg vanished. But what we need to understand now is, where was she? Where was Alice?" The widow's composure, already fraying, shattered. Her dark veil slipped from her face, revealing tear-streaked cheeks. "Alice," she breathed. "My daughter. She was Captain Henry Linton's child, born before our marriage. Greta Lindberg, the governess. She fled abroad with the baby. When the affair was discovered, Henry begged me to help. I tried to save him from disgrace. I never imagined it would come to this." Tommy's jaw tightened. "So the child disappeared with Greta?" "Yes," Mrs. Linton cried. "And the captain was frantic. Dr. Hart, his friend, he covered for him, said the girl had been sent away, that Greta had left the country. But she didn't." Her hands trembled over the locket. "She returned years later, threatened exposure, and she was paid to disappear again. No one knew where she went. I thought it had ended. I believed it had ended." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. "Yet here we are. The truth is still breathing." She glanced at Dr. Hart, who stood awkwardly in the corner, guilt and hesitation written in every line of his posture. He began. I sought the letters because the past cannot remain hidden forever. I wanted to retrieve proof before scandal erupted, not to harm anyone, but to protect the living and the memory of the dead. Tuppence studied him carefully. Yet one thing doesn't fit. Greta's passport records never used. She should have left. She never did. Could it be she stayed here? Hart's shoulders stiffened. I didn't consider that. I assumed she fled. I hoped she had. The room fell silent, except for the faint ticking of a distant clock. Then Tuppence spoke, her voice low but firm. If Greta never left, if the passport was unused and the child disappeared here, then perhaps something worse happened. Perhaps she died in this house. Mrs. Linton gasped. No, that cannot be. I would have known. Would you? Asked Tuppence softly, stepping closer. Greystones is full of hidden corners, forgotten rooms. Perhaps the girl was trapped and no one noticed. Tommy exhaled. If we're correct, then the truth waits somewhere behind the nursery, possibly in places not meant to be found. Then we'll look, said Tuppence. The three of them moved to the overgrown garden behind the nursery. Moonlight no longer guided them. Dawn painted the scene in misty silver. The well, almost hidden beneath nettles and overgrown ivy, loomed like a mouth opening to the past. Its stone edges were slick with dew, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth. Tommy shone the torch down its depths. Nothing yet, he murmured. Tuppence crouched beside the rim, her fingers brushing against something smooth beneath the tangled roots. Tommy, over here, there's silk. He leaned forward, catching the gleam. What on earth? Together they drew back a small section of ivy, revealing a bundle wrapped in faded silk, tied delicately with a ribbon yellowed by time. The air around the well seemed to grow heavier, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Mrs. Linton's hands flew to her mouth. Alice, she whispered, stepping forward but trembling violently. Tuppence carefully untied the ribbon. Inside lay skeletal remains, small, delicate, unmistakably a child. The silk had preserved them, though the years had rendered the fabric brittle. A soft wind stirred, carrying with it the faintest echo of a lullaby, haunting and gentle. Tommy's hand rested briefly on Tuppence's shoulder. Poor little girl, he murmured. Mrs. Linton fell to her knees, gasping. Alice, my child, she whispered, grief breaking through. My poor child. Dr. Hart's face was pale. I should have known. I should have searched more diligently. I failed her. Tuppence gently placed her hand on Mrs. Linton's back. We will make this right. But first, we must see the evidence. Every letter, every document. Mrs. Linton, faint but resolute, led them to the hidden compartment within the nursery wall, where faded letters lay stacked tied with string, alongside the tiny locket that had survived so many years. Tuppence opened the locket once more. Inside, 2 photographs, Alice as a child and a man in uniform, Captain Henry Linton. The resemblance was undeniable. Then it is true, whispered Tommy. She was his daughter, born before the marriage. Yes, Mrs. Linton said, her voice broken. And I tried to cover it all, to protect the reputation of the family, of the captain, and of myself. Tuppence's eyes were steady. But secrets like this cannot remain buried forever. Someone, Greta Lindbergh perhaps, or the doctor, tried to manipulate the story. That is why letters had to be retrieved, why we were followed, why the shots were fired. Dr. Hart swallowed. I only wanted to protect the living. I never wished to harm her or anyone. Protection has its price, Tuppence said softly. She glanced at Mrs. Linton, then at the small skeleton, and in this case the price was tragic indeed. Mrs. Linton closed her eyes, overcome by grief. The dawn light poured through the nursery windows, casting silver lines across the floorboards. She sank to the floor, fainting, her hands clutching the locket and letters as though their weight could anchor her heart. Tommy knelt beside her. She's fainted, Tuppence. Get some water, quick. Tuppence retrieved a small jug from the window ledge and poured cool water onto Mrs. Linton's palms. Slowly she stirred, eyelids fluttering open to reveal tear-filled eyes. I couldn't bear it, she whispered, to know the truth and to find her here. Tuppence gently guided her to sit against the wall. "It's over, Mrs. Linton. The truth has surfaced, and we can ensure she is finally remembered properly." Dr. Hart knelt beside her, guilt etched on every line of his face. "I failed you," he admitted quietly, "but no longer. Now we can make amends." Tommy glanced at the overgrown garden and the hidden well. Poor Alice, buried in secrecy, nearly forgotten, but now she has been found, and the story, the whole tangled, tragic story, can finally be told. Mrs. Linton nodded weakly. Yes, at last. Tuppence, still holding the locket, looked around the nursery. "There's still one inconsistency," she murmured. "Greta Lindberg's passport, unused, which means she never left the country. Perhaps she died here, and the captain and Dr. Hart covered for her. That much is certain now." Dr. Hart lowered his gaze. "Yes, I never intended. I only hoped to protect reputations. I never imagined. Protection does not erase guilt," said Tuppence gently. "But it does show intent, and that's why we're here, to uncover, to witness, and to prevent further harm." Outside, the first rays of dawn glimmered across the manor grounds. The ivy on the walls glistened with dew, and the air was filled with the faint, sweet scent of grass and flowers, as if nature itself were trying to soothe the remnants of sorrow. Tommy stood beside Tuppence, his hand resting lightly on hers. "Well, darling, it seems we've solved one tragedy and uncovered another. And yet, I dare say, there are still shadows in the corners." Tuppence gave a faint smile, resolute. "We'll follow them, one shadow at a time. But for now, Alice can finally rest." Mrs. Linton, regaining her composure slightly, clutched the letters and locket to her chest. "Thank you for uncovering the truth, even if it shatters what remains of my composure." The morning light stretched further, bathing the nursery in soft gold. For the first time in decades, Greystones Manor seemed almost peaceful, its long-held secrets finally exhumed, leaving only the quiet knowledge of what had been hidden and what must now be remembered. Tuppence carefully placed the locket in her bag, along with the letters. She glanced at Tommy, who nodded. Together they left the nursery, the hidden well, and the tragic history behind them, carrying the story forward, as witnesses, as detectives, as the ones who would ensure Alice Wren's memory endured. The inquest room smelled of damp wood and varnish, the faint tang of iron from the coroner's table lingering beneath the warm morning air. A solemn hush had settled over the gathered villagers, punctuated only by the rustle of papers and the occasional creak of the high-backed chairs. Tuppence sat beside Tommy, her notebook poised but unopened. They had spent a restless night tossing over the discoveries at Greystones, the skeleton, the locket, the letters, Mrs. Linton's confession. Yet the weight of unanswered questions pressed on her like the fog still lingering over the village green. The coroner, a thin man with spectacles that slid perpetually down the bridge of his nose, peered over a set of documents. "The skeletal remains recovered from Greystones Manor are hereby presumed to be those of the unidentified child concealed on the premises," he intoned. "Cause of death, undetermined. Circumstantial evidence suggests concealment following death in the house. There is no indication of foul play beyond prior concealment." Murmurs swept through the room. Tommy leaned close, whispering, "Accidental confinement. That's generous, considering it took 10 years to uncover." Tuppence's eyes scanned the small display beside the table, the fragments of silk, the tiny toy horse, the locket. She frowned. "Generous, yes, but something isn't sitting right." "What is it?" Tommy asked, glancing toward the coroner. "The toy horse," she whispered. "Why would a child's toy be buried with the skeleton? And why is it identical to the one kept by Mrs. Linton? That detail wasn't accounted for in the coroner's summation." Tommy's brow furrowed. "So, you're thinking it's not Greta's body after all?" Tuppence shook her head slowly. "Not exactly. It's someone else's. Greta might have vanished again, or more likely she never left the house in the first place. But the child who died, the toy hints at a different parentage." After the inquest adjourned, Tuppence slipped quietly into the parish records room, where the clerk, a punctual man with ink-stained fingers, greeted her warily. "I need records," she said softly. "Old records, births, baptisms, admissions, anything for 1935. The clerk eyed her. "You're interested in the Greta Lindbergh case, miss?" "Something along those lines," Tuppence said, smiling faintly, merely for clarity. Hours passed. She sifted through brittle ledgers, entries in fading ink, noting dates, parentage, surnames, and places of residence. One entry caught her attention. Child born to Greta Lindbergh, surname altered to Thornton, date of birth recorded 5th of July, 1935, baptized St. Mildred's Church. Tuppence's pulse quickened. The surname was false, deliberately altered. But the date, it did not correspond to Alice Wren's disappearance. Something had been concealed deliberately. She retraced the entries, cross-referencing the names. The parish records indicated another child lost to the register, but this one had a completely different birth date, earlier in 1935. A soft cough startled her. She looked up to see Mrs. Pym, the vicar's wife, standing by the doorway. "You're persistent," the older woman said, "and inquisitive. Tuppence, you might not like what you find." "I don't believe I'll ever like what I find," Tuppence said calmly. "But I need to know. Can you tell me anything about the children connected to Holloway Lodge?" Mrs. Pym hesitated, wringing her hands. "Many years ago, Mrs. Linton lost a baby herself. The nursemaid was distraught. Everyone thought the child had been sent away quietly. There were whispers, of course, one never knows in this village." Tuppence froze, her mind racing. "A lost baby?" she murmured. "Yes. Never explained. Never returned. People assumed death in infancy, though no official record was made public. Mrs. Linton kept it quiet, naturally." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. Slowly she pieced together the fragments of tragedy. Greta Lindbergh had brought her child to Greystones, but there was another infant, Mrs. Linton's real daughter, who had died, the one now recovered from the well. The toy horse, the locket, the letters, they had been intended for Alice, but the child who died in the hidden well was not Alice. A sudden, sharp clarity struck her. The living Alice Wren had been swapped at birth. Greta Lindbergh's child was the one who disappeared in records, leaving Mrs. Linton's real daughter to perish in the secret of Greystones Manor. Tommy leaned over her shoulder. "You're saying the skeleton is not Greta's child at all? It's Mrs. Linton's real daughter?" "Yes," Tuppence whispered. "And the child we've been calling Alice Wren all this time, Mrs. Dewhurst, is actually Greta's daughter, raised as a ward of the village, unaware of her true parentage." Tommy's eyes widened. "So Mrs. Dewhurst is the illegitimate daughter of Captain Henry Linton?" Tuppence nodded. "Exactly. That explains the intrusions at Greystones. Her son, the boy exploring his mother's past, was inadvertently investigating his grandmother's secrets. He thought he was just poking around, but the truth beneath the ivy and stones is far older." Tommy's face reflected disbelief and awe. "All this, and she never suspected?" "No," Tuppence said softly. "Greta must have raised her daughter carefully, keeping the truth hidden, and Mrs. Dewhurst, anxious and fearful, unknowingly wandered too close to her own past when the toy horse and letters began surfacing. They left the records office, walking along the dew-dampened lanes. The fog had lifted, leaving silver streaks across the grass. Tuppence spoke first, her voice low. "So, the intruder we saw at Greystones, Dr. Hart, he wasn't targeting Greta at all. He was trying to retrieve the papers before anyone realized the body was not Greta. He was trying to retrieve documents before scandal erupted, protecting reputations but blind to the truth of who had died." Tommy looked over at her. All the threats, the shot, the glove, they were based on half-truths. Someone believed they were protecting a secret that had already claimed a life. "Yes, and now," Tuppence continued, "the living child, Mrs. Dewhurst, is connected to all of this without knowing it. The past has been trying to reach her through us." Tommy shook his head. "I must admit, it's the most tangled family tree I've ever seen. Roots buried in deception, branches twisting through secrets, leaves, children, hidden and mistaken for years." They returned to the inn, silent for a time, letting the revelations settle. Tuppence laid out the locket, the letters, and the toy horse before Tommy. "We need to explain this delicately to Mrs. Dewhurst. She deserves the truth, but she must not be harmed by it." Tommy's expression softened. "Poor child. She's been walking through life unaware that the house across the lane, the one her mother once feared, is tied to her own origins. And all along, The intrusions were her son's innocent curiosity. Tuppence tapped the locket gently. The irony is that the key to the mystery was never outside, never in some stranger's hand. It was buried in greystones. Hidden by grief and fear, the child who perished carried the weight of secrecy, and the living child inherited the consequences without even knowing. A knock on the inn door interrupted them. Mrs. Dewhurst entered, her face pale and anxious. I saw something last night. At Greystones. Lights. I thought my imagination was running away with me. Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. It wasn't your imagination, Mrs. Dewhurst, but what you saw was part of a story older than yourself. The widow sank into a chair, wringing her hands. I don't understand. The intrusions, the notes, the toy horse. Tuppence spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. The child who died at Greystones was not you. It was someone else, someone close to the family hidden away. You are the daughter of Greta Lindberg. Your father, well, the connections are complex, but you have always been part of this story, unknowingly. Mrs. Dewhurst's hands flew to her mouth. You mean, I'm my mother? Yes, Tuppence said gently. And the intrusions, the fears, the investigations by your son, all stem from curiosity about a past you never knew was yours. Tears filled Mrs. Dewhurst's eyes. All these years, I've feared the nursery, the house across the lane, and it was my own history I was walking past. Tommy rested a comforting hand on hers. You're safe now. The past has been uncovered, the secrets revealed. Nothing remains hidden. Tuppence looked at the toy horse once more. It's remarkable how small things, a toy, a locket, a photograph, can hold the truth of entire lives. Mrs. Dewhurst nodded slowly. And now I know, the mistakes, the losses, the lives that were altered, I can face it. Tuppence smiled faintly. The truth, once discovered, sets the living free, though it comes at a price. Tommy raised his glass of tea, to Alice, to Greta, and to the past finally revealed. Mrs. Dewhurst touched the rim of her cup lightly, to understanding and to remembering those who cannot speak for themselves. As the sun rose higher, spilling golden light across the inn-room, the weight of the secret lifted. For the first time in decades, the tangled threads of Greystones Manor, Greta Lindberg, and Captain Linton's family were untwined. The wrong child had been discovered, and the living, long-hidden daughter now knew the truth of her origin. Tuppence closed her notebook, her hand lingering over the photograph of Alice Wren. The nursery no longer holds secrets. The past has spoken, and we have listened. Tommy leaned back in his chair. I must say, darling, this has been a morning like no other. I suppose the village can breathe easier now. Yes, Tuppence said softly, though some of its shadows will never entirely vanish. Shadows, after all, are the shape of memory. And outside, St. Mildred seemed to nod in agreement, the gentle breeze carrying away the last vestiges of fear, leaving clarity, truth, and the fragile peace of understanding. The late morning sunlight fell softly on St. Mildred's, gilding the rooftops and dappling the lane outside Mrs. Dewhurst's cottage with gentle warmth. The day seemed ordinary, peaceful, a stark contrast to the secrets it had yet to unearth. Tommy and Tuppence walked briskly along the lane toward Mrs. Dewhurst's house, their minds weighed with the revelations at Greystones and the grim clarity of the skeleton discovered in the well. I suppose it's time, Tommy said softly, adjusting his coat collar against the cool breeze. Time to tell her. Tuppence glanced at him, eyes bright with determination. Yes, gently. We don't want to traumatize her more than necessary. The truth must come as a guide, not a hammer. Mrs. Dewhurst's cottage sat across from the same manor that had haunted her dreams, Greystones. Her garden was tidy yet overgrown in places, hedges curling like hesitant fingers. The widow herself was at the door, peering down the lane with the same anxious look Tuppence had seen before. She smiled weakly when she saw them approaching. Mrs. Dewhurst, Tuppence began warmly, may we come in? We have something important to discuss. She nodded and stepped aside. Of course. Come in quickly. I have a terrible feeling something's about to happen. Inside, the room was small, cosy, and furnished with well-loved simplicity. A kettle sang softly on the stove. The faint scent of tea and lavender filled the space, grounding the tension. Mrs. Dewhurst gestured toward the armchairs. Tuppence sat, placing her notebook on her lap, while Tommy remained standing, posture casual but watchful. "Mrs. Dewhurst, we know this will be difficult, but we believe you are connected to the history of Greystones Manor in a way you do not yet understand." Her brow furrowed, a shiver of apprehension passing over her. I've feared that. The nursery, the windows, my dreams." "Yes," Tuppence said gently. "We need to explain what has been hidden from you all these years. Please try to listen with us carefully." Tuppence outlined the chain of events. Greta Lindberg's presence at Greystones, the child swap, Mrs. Linton's lost daughter, and the discovery of the skeleton in the hidden well. She described the letters, the locket, and the toy horse, each detail leading to one undeniable fact. Mrs. Dewhurst was, unknowingly, the child of Greta Lindberg and Captain Henry Linton. Mrs. Dewhurst's hands trembled, clutching her lap. I don't understand. My son, he played at being a detective with the manor. Yes, but this," her voice broke. "Dreams. I have had dreams. A nursery. A woman singing in a language I could not understand. I thought it was foolish imagination." Tuppence leaned forward. "Those dreams were memories, Mrs. Dewhurst. Dreams of your infancy, shadows of your earliest experiences before you were taken from your birth mother. Your son's play at Greystones," his curiosity, "was stirring fragments of those memories." Her eyes welled with tears, lips quivering. "And the stranger?" Tommy spoke carefully. "There was no criminal. The intruder you saw was your own son, exploring the manor, searching for hints of his mother's past. He meant no harm. He was only searching for identity, for the story that belonged to him." Mrs. Dewhurst's shoulders slumped in both relief and disbelief. "My son? Innocent?" "Completely," said Tuppence. "The threat was a misunderstanding, compounded by others attempting to protect their own secrets." "And Dr. Hart?" Mrs. Dewhurst asked, voice barely above a whisper. "What role did he play?" Tommy's expression darkened slightly. Hart sought to retrieve documents before anyone could expose them. He acted out of misguided loyalty, trying to prevent scandal, but in doing so he endangered lives and created fear. The widow's face paled. Then, the letters, the locket, the warnings, the shots, all of it, meant to conceal the truth. "Yes," Tuppence said, "but the truth could not remain hidden. The past found its way through the threads of memory, toys, letters, and curiosity." Mrs. Dewhurst sat in stunned silence, absorbing the enormity of the revelations. Finally she whispered, I am the child of Greta Lindberg, and the person I thought was lost, the one whose death haunted the manor, she was not me, it was Mrs. Linton's daughter." Tuppence nodded. "Exactly. The skeleton was Mrs. Linton's child. You survived, raised under another name, unaware of your parentage. Your son's explorations brought the story back to light." The widow's hands shook, tears streaming freely now. "All these years, the fear, the anxiety, I carried it without knowing why. And my son, he only wanted to know who he was." Tommy took her hand. "You are safe, Mrs. Dewhurst. Nothing more can harm you. And your son, he unwittingly completed what others had tried to hide." The clock in the corner ticked solemnly as silence settled, heavy with the weight of unspoken grief and long-held truths. Meanwhile, news of the skeleton and the letters had reached Scotland Yard. Inspector Marriott, a tall man with a grave manner, arrived in St. Mildred's mid-afternoon. He had a presence that demanded attention without force, eyes sharp and calculating. Tuppence and Tommy accompanied him to the railway station, where Dr. Hart had been spotted attempting to leave the village. Hart's nervous glances and quick steps betrayed his intentions. "Stop right there, Doctor," Tommy called as Hart attempted to board the train unnoticed. Hart froze, hands gripping the strap of his bag. I was only leaving. I had urgent business." Inspector Marriott stepped forward, authoritative. "Dr. Hart, you are under observation. You will come with us." Hart's shoulders sagged, realizing there was no escape. "Very well," he said quietly, almost defeated. "I suppose the truth cannot be outrun." Marriott's voice was steady. "You will explain everything at the station, from the concealment of Greta Lindberg's child to your actions at Greystones Manor." Tuppence observed silently, notebook in hand, as Hart complied. There was a quiet dignity in his resignation, guilt tempered by the knowledge that exposure was now inevitable. Back in St. Mildred's, Mrs. Dewhurst sat quietly in her cottage, holding her son's hand. "All this, it's overwhelming," she murmured. "And yet, there is relief. The past, finally unveiled." Tuppence smiled gently. "Yes, and now it belongs to you, fully. You can choose how to live with it, not be haunted by shadows you never understood." Her son looked up at her, eyes wide and curious. "Mother, I didn't know." "You did wonderfully," she said softly, stroking his hair. "And thanks to your courage, the truth is free at last." Outside, the village seemed to breathe with renewed calm. Birds called, the wind rustled through trees, and sunlight warmed the streets, washing away the lingering chill of secrecy. Inspector Marriott returned later that afternoon, brief and precise. "Dr. Hart has confessed fully," he said. "All the actions taken to conceal the past, all the threats, all the letters, accounted for. No further danger remains." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "And you're satisfied the matter is closed?" Marriott nodded. "Yes, the case is resolved. The skeleton, the letters, the locket, all verified. Mrs. Linton's involvement was complex, but no crime remains active. The child's identity, Mrs. Dewhurst, is now officially recognized." Tuppence let out a long breath. "Bittersweet relief, Inspector. Bittersweet indeed." "Such is the nature of truth," Marriott said quietly. "It liberates, but sometimes it wounds before it heals." Later, Mrs. Linton quietly left the village. She moved with a pale dignity, broken yet freed from the burden of her long-held guilt. No one spoke of her departure. The villagers, understanding the delicacy of her situation, allowed her absence to remain unnoticed. Tuppence and Tommy walked back to the inn, hand in hand, hearts lighter now that the shadow over the village had lifted. "It seems, darling," Tommy said, "that the nursery, the toy horse, the letters and the skeleton all conspired to teach us one lesson. The past has a stubborn way of revealing itself." Tuppence nodded. "And we must always listen, even to dreams and whispers, because they carry truths the living might otherwise overlook." Tommy laughed softly. At least it wasn't raining. She smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the golden sunlight. "No, it was worse. It was the weight of 10 years of secrecy. But now, at last, it's over." The St. Mildred's Square was peaceful, the children playing, unaware of the revelations that had shaken their streets. But Tuppence and Tommy knew, in places like Greystones and Holloway Lodge, the echoes of the past never truly vanish, they only wait for someone to listen. Together they walked back toward the inn, the warmth of morning and the sense of resolution wrapping around them. The stranger at last revealed had changed everything, but in the revealing there was relief, truth, and a fragile peace for those who remained. The morning in London unfolded with its usual blend of foggy charm and distant clatter. The city hummed gently outside the window of South Audley Mansions, where the aroma of toast and strong tea mingled with the faint tang of polished brass and fresh linen. Tommy sat across the breakfast table, a cup of steaming tea in one hand, his eyes half focused on the morning paper. Tuppence, in her usual poised manner, stirred her cup with a silver teaspoon, the rhythm deliberate as though each circle of motion allowed her mind to untangle the events of the last few weeks. "Oddly," Tommy began, his voice teasing, "I'm beginning to believe every English nursery hides a secret. Half of England was born in one, and the other half haunted by it." Tuppence tilted her head thoughtfully, watching the sunlight catch the glint of her spoon. "The past," she murmured, "always sends letters eventually, or toys, or in some cases the skeleton of someone long forgotten." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Quite, and I suppose our little adventure in St. Mildred's counts as both a letter and a toy." He sipped his tea and shook his head, smiling faintly. Who knew a nursery could be the scene of such drama? A skeleton, a locket, letters, an Austrian governess, a lost child, and the air of the village thick with secrets. Tuppence's eyes sparkled with that familiar mix of irony and warmth. "Childhood seems the most dangerous place of all," she said softly. "Perhaps more perilous than the streets of Paris or the docks of Liverpool. especially when the adults refuse to mind their own business. Tommy laughed, leaning back in his chair. I dare say that's true. And yet, here we are, comfortably seated, digesting the last remnants of scandal with marmalade on toast and tea. I must admit, it's a rather civilized conclusion. Their conversation was punctuated by a polite knock at the door. The maid, ever punctual and discreet, entered with a small parcel wrapped in plain brown paper, tied neatly with string. "A delivery for Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," she said, bowing slightly. Tommy accepted it, noting the careful handwriting. "Curious," he muttered. No return address. Tuppence leaned over as he untied the string, revealing a small, familiar object within, the toy horse, now repaired and polished to a gentle shine. The note accompanying it read, "For the kind detectives who opened my window long closed. Monsieur Dewhurst." Tuppence held the toy in her hands, turning it over slowly. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the repairs nearly invisible. She glanced at Tommy, her lips curved in a smile that was part amusement, part sentiment. "Well," said Tommy, setting his own cup down with a soft clink, "I suppose we've been officially thanked by the very child we rescued without realizing it." "And the note," Tuppence added, "reminds us that even the smallest gestures carry weight. A toy, a letter, the past persists, and gratitude sometimes comes in miniature form." Tommy leaned back, considering the scene before him, the polished toy, the sunlight falling across the table, and Tuppence's serene composure. "You know, darling," he said, "perhaps it's time we expanded the agency. I can see it now. Beresford and Beresford, specializing in nursery crimes." Tuppence chuckled. "Nursery crimes?" "Yes," Tommy continued, warming to the idea. "Missing children, stolen toys, secret governesses, misplaced letters, skeletal remains hidden in wells. A niche market if there ever was one. We'd corner the industry." Tuppence's smile widened, though it remained contemplative. "Why not? Childhood has its own rules, and evidently its own dangers. Adults meddle, children disappear, and detectives chase shadows. We might do well to establish a branch devoted entirely to these domestic enigmas." Tommy laughed, the sound rich and comfortable, filling the kitchen with warmth. "I can see the advertisements now. Expert investigation of childhood mysteries. Beresford and Beresford, London." Tuppence shook her head, her fingers idly tracing the painted mane of the toy horse. "It's remarkable," she said quietly, "how often the past reaches into the present through objects. A locket, a toy, a letter, tangible memories that guide us to truths otherwise hidden." Tommy reached over, lightly touching the rim of her cup. "You've always had a flair for seeing the significance in the smallest things. Without you, I fear the skeleton in the well would still be a secret, and the truth of Alice, or rather, Mrs. Dewhurst, would remain buried." Tuppence's eyes softened. "And yet, sometimes I wonder if the past, once unearthed, is as gentle as we hope. Some truths heal, but others wound. The challenge lies in knowing which is which." The parcel on the table, with its toy horse gleaming under the morning light, seemed to embody that delicate balance, a reminder that discovery could be sweet, even when the story that birthed it had been so sorrowful. Tommy shook his head in mock solemnity. "I suppose our next case should involve the infant nursery at the vicarage, just to see what secrets half the village is hiding." Tuppence laughed. "Do you imagine the vicar would allow his infants to be scrutinized by detectives?" "He might, if I promised discretion and proper respect for the cradles," Tommy replied, grinning. "Though truly," Tuppence said thoughtfully, "perhaps it's the forgotten toys, the unseen corners, and the whispered warnings that matter most. These are the places where the past lingers, not merely in adults' memories, but in objects and the stories they carry." Tommy raised his teacup. "To forgotten toys and the wisdom of small objects, then." Tuppence clinked her cup against his. "To uncovering the past with tact, and occasionally with irony." The morning passed with a gentle domesticity that contrasted sharply with the shadows of St. Mildred's and the dark corners of Greystones Manor. The city outside remained oblivious to the delicate resolutions occurring within the walls of South Audley Mansions. Tuppence set the toy horse carefully beside her notebook. "It's fascinating," she said, "how an object designed for play can carry the weight of secrets, guilt, and revelation. One wonders if adults ever truly appreciate the power of a child's world. Tommy shrugged. Perhaps they do, in the quiet moments when they are forced to confront it, like we were, a fortnight ago, in a darkened nursery, chasing shadows that turned out to be more real than any of us expected. Tuppence smiled faintly, recalling the narrow escape from Dr. Hart's desperate pursuit and the fragile peace of the revelations at Greystones. I suppose, she said, that detectives are merely custodians of these objects, the ones who listen when the past tries to speak. A faint knock interrupted them. The maid entered again, carrying a fresh pot of tea and a plate of biscuits. Her eyes lingered curiously on the repaired toy horse. Tommy gestured toward it. Ah, here's our messenger of gratitude. The maid smiled faintly and nodded. Seems a little adventure has made its way from the countryside to London. Tuppence picked up the horse, turning it over in her hands. It's polished and restored, yet still carries the echoes of a much darker story. A story of children, secrets, and the consequences of adult choices. Tommy took a bite of biscuit, crumbs falling lightly onto his napkin. And yet, it's charming in its own way. Who would have thought a toy horse could be the key to unravelling a decade-long mystery? Tuppence's smile widened. The smallest details often matter most. That's why we notice them, and why we survive as detectives, by observing the subtle, the overlooked, and the understated. Tommy leaned back, satisfied, though his eyes twinkled with mischief. I think we should seriously consider opening a division dedicated to nursery-related investigations. There's an entire network of secrets out there just waiting for us to sort them out. Tuppence laughed, a soft, musical sound that warmed the room. Why not? We've proven that even the most seemingly innocent corners of childhood can harbour mysteries worthy of our attention. She set the toy horse carefully beside her notebook, as if acknowledging its newfound significance. And sometimes it's not the skeletons or letters that tell the story, but the simple, enduring objects, a toy, a note, a locket, that link past and present. Tommy sipped his tea thoughtfully. Then here's to toys, locketed secrets, and the ever-persistent past. Tuppence raised her cup, her eyes bright and reflective. And here's to observing, listening, and when necessary, gently opening windows long closed. A final, comfortable silence settled over the breakfast table. Outside, London streets continued their usual rhythm, carriages rattling over cobbles, shopkeepers opening shutters, the scent of baking mingling with the morning fog. But inside South Audley Mansions there was peace, the past acknowledged, the living relieved, and the smallest detective agency in England, for now, content. Tuppence reached for her notebook and wrote a single line for posterity. Childhood, the most dangerous place of all. She glanced at Tommy, who winked in agreement, and together they enjoyed the quiet warmth of tea, biscuits, and the unspoken satisfaction of a case fully resolved, with just enough irony to make it charming. The streets of London glowed softly beneath the early dusk, gas lamps flickering against the dimming sky and casting long, melancholy shadows across the cobbles. The city breathed with its usual mixture of clatter and hush, the distant rumble of carriages, the faint murmur of pedestrians, and the occasional bell of a tram punctuating the quiet. Tuppence walked briskly, her coat drawn close around her, scarf fluttering faintly in the breeze. Her thoughts wandered lazily between the past and the present, the secrets unearthed at Greystones, the revelation of Mrs. Dewhurst's true parentage, and the delicate resolution of lives long entwined with deception. She felt the weight of those discoveries, yet also a peculiar lightness, a sense that, at last, the ghosts of the past were allowed to rest. As she passed a small toy shop tucked into the corner of a quiet street, the warm light spilling from the window caught her attention. Inside, a music box turned lazily on a low pedestal, its intricate mechanism producing a familiar, lilting lullaby. Tuppence paused, frozen by the melody, the same haunting tune she had first heard drifting from Greystones Manor all those weeks ago in St. Mildred's. Her heart tightened momentarily, memory and imagination mingling. For a fleeting instant, she thought she could hear the faint laughter of a child, the echoes of small footsteps in a nursery long closed. She pressed a hand to the glass, her eyes tracing the delicate figures of wooden toys arrayed in the window. Each seemed impossibly alive in the soft glow, their painted faces innocent yet silent witnesses to histories she had glimpsed only recently. "Lost in thought again, darling?" Tommy's voice broke her reverie. He stood behind her, umbrella in hand, coat collar turned against the chill evening air. His grin was light, teasing, the kind that had carried her through many a tense moment. "I might be," she admitted softly. "That lullaby, it takes me back." "Back to Greystones?" he asked, glancing at the toy shop window. "Or just back to sentimentality, which I suspect is more your style than mine?" Tuppence rolled her eyes, a faint smile playing across her lips. "Perhaps a bit of both. It's remarkable how something so small, a song, a toy, can hold the weight of so many stories." Tommy leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You've been known to overthink tiny things, my dear, but I suppose in this case it's warranted. That lullaby carried a whole village's secrets." Tuppence nodded, still gazing at the spinning music box. "It's more than secrets. It's memory, a fragment of time that refuses to vanish." They stood quietly together, the lullaby weaving through the evening air, blending with the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional echoing footsteps of pedestrians passing by. The city seemed to slow around them, granting a rare moment of reflection and serenity. "Shall we continue our walk?" Tommy asked gently, though he lingered at her side, unwilling to break the spell entirely. "Yes," she said, finally turning, her eyes still lingering on the music box, but not without remembering that some melodies never truly end. They moved down the street, umbrella tilting slightly against a soft drizzle, the gas lamps reflecting on the wet stones like liquid amber. Tuppence's mind wandered again to the weeks past, the discovery of the skeleton, the unravelling of the swapped children, Dr. Hart's confession, and Mrs. Linton's quiet departure. Each thread had been resolved, each truth exposed, yet the echoes of human emotion, fear, guilt, love, and longing, remained. As they walked, a shadow flickered in the window behind them. Tuppence glanced back instinctively. The shopkeeper, a middle-aged man with spectacles and a kind, measured expression, was arranging a display of tin soldiers, his movements deliberate. But there was something else, a figure standing just behind the counter. Tuppence squinted, heart picking up pace. A young woman, her hair tied back neatly, hummed softly along with the music box's tune. Her eyes, a striking shade of blue, met Tuppence's for an instant, familiar yet distant. There was recognition there, though subtle, almost imperceptible. Tommy noticed her glance and arched an eyebrow. "Do I detect curiosity or déjà vu?" he murmured quietly. Tuppence shook her head, unable to speak for a moment. The young woman's presence, so quietly observed, felt like the final note in a long, complicated composition. She was connected, in ways both revealed and unrevealed, to the stories they had unravelled. A living reminder that while cases close, the resonance of the past never entirely disappears. "She's humming the lullaby," Tuppence whispered, "and she looks familiar somehow." Tommy glanced back, then smiled faintly. "I suppose some mysteries enjoy a gentle echo. Even when they're resolved, they leave a trace." Tuppence followed the young woman with her gaze for a moment longer. The music box spun, its song tender and deliberate, filling the space with a sense of continuity and memory. Then, as the detectives turned and continued down the street, the young woman slipped from view behind the counter, leaving only the faint imprint of her presence and the lingering melody. "It seems the past has a way of lingering," Tuppence said softly, her hand brushing Tommy's as they walked side by side. "Even when everyone thinks the story is done, the echoes remain, gentle, haunting, eternal." Tommy chuckled softly, shaking his umbrella to shed the drizzle. "And in our line of work, we must be prepared to hear those echoes, and sometimes to follow them." Tuppence's lips curved in a faint smile. "We do, and perhaps that is the lesson of Greystones, of the nursery, of the letters, and the toy horse. The past cannot be ignored, but it can be understood, and its music remembered." They strolled through the quiet London streets, the glow of gas lamps illuminating their path. The city seemed calm, yet beneath its ordinary rhythm, the memory of St. Mildred's, Greystones Manor, and the children's stories remained, imperceptibly threading through time. Tommy glanced at Tuppence, his expression warm and teasing. Well, shall we go home or start plotting nursery investigations for the next dozen years? Tuppence laughed, a soft musical sound. I think, for now, we should simply walk and listen to the music. Some cases require no action, only observation and reflection. The lullaby echoed faintly behind them, rising from the toy shop window. For a moment, Tuppence imagined a small child spinning in the nursery, a face half lit by moonlight, hands clutching a tiny horse. She smiled gently at the memory, even though she knew it was more vision than reality. Tommy gave her shoulder a playful squeeze. "Don't get sentimental now, darling. We have a reputation to maintain as sharp-eyed detectives." "I'm aware," she replied, her smile lingering, "but even the sharpest eyes can appreciate a melody once it's finally been played in full." They turned the corner together, the hum of the city embracing them as they walked home. Behind the glass of the toy shop, the music box continued to play, its notes drifting softly into the evening. And behind the counter, the young woman with the familiar blue eyes hummed along, a subtle, living echo of all that had come before. The case was closed. Greystones had yielded its secrets. The lost child had been found, the skeleton accounted for, and the letters explained. Yet in London, the lullaby, the melody of the past, lingered, a quiet reminder that some stories never entirely vanish, but remain, gentle, haunting, and eternal. Tuppence inhaled the cool evening air, letting the notes of the song settle in her chest. Tommy offered his arm, and together they walked on, leaving the toy shop and its echoes behind, yet carrying the music, the story were with them. For the past, she realized, is not merely history. It is a song, a whisper, a lesson, and sometimes a lullaby.